Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at My Expat Taxes. For my fellow Americans out there, we all know tax season is upon us, and for anyone who's ever had the pleasure of dealing with multiple tax agencies in multiple countries, you know this can be a challenging experience. That's why when it comes to dealing with anything tax-related abroad, I always recommend hiring a pro to help you navigate this unknown space. In my experience, this not only saves you time and spares you from the unnecessary headaches, it also has literally saved me thousands of dollars in taxes over the years. So I am super excited to introduce you to My Expat Taxes, a true pro in this space that focuses 100% on U.S. expat taxes. Whether you're filing for 2023, catching up on back taxes, predicting a future tax obligation for a future move abroad, or just looking for some guidance, My Expat Taxes has your back with speedy and affordable online filing options and real human accountants to assist you as needed. Join the more than 16,000 other Americans living abroad who have used their services by visiting myexpattaxes.com via the link in the show. My guest today is my friend Gian Carlo, who joins us from the beautiful city of Milan in northern Italy. And we are talking about one of the most exciting developments in the digital nomad visa space in quite some time. Italy has just introduced a digital nomad visa, which means that if you're a remote worker or you can support yourself with just about $25,000 US per year, then you can probably go and spend a year or more, up to a lifetime, in Italy with their new digital nomad visa. So we're diving into all the details and information that you need to know in case you are interested in pursuing this visa. Giancarlo is a professional. I've worked closely with Lexidy for many years now and can highly recommend their services. So this was a lot of fun, also super informative. And for anyone out there considering coming over to Europe and using the digital nomad visa in Italy, I think you are definitely going to want to listen to this one. So please help me in welcoming Giancarlo to About Abroad. Ciao, Giancarlo. Good to see you again, my friend. How are things?
Good to see you as well, man. Well, things are going great, actually. And after a little trip to Japan, back in Italy with full steam. So everything's in place, and we're very eager to start providing a lot of information to our listeners and clients about the digital nomads. I think that's the hot topic right now.
That's exactly why we brought you in today, because you rightfully, well deserved, took a few weeks off, flew across the world, spent some time in Japan, and got to disconnect. And that's when the Italian government finally decides to say, "Hey, yeah, let's do the digital nomad visa in Italy." And it's since then been one of the most popular topics that I've been having with conversations that I've been having with people in this space that we live in. But I'm not the right guy to answer the specifics about this visa. That's where you come in. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to chat about it a little bit and to find out, what people need to know. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the Italian digital nomad visa, can you just provide a little bit of background? Obviously, I know you. We've worked together, and our partnership with Lexidy is super tight. So, I think people are kind of familiar with Lexidy, but maybe just give a quick background on yourself, what you do and what Lexidy does, so people are aware.
Cool. Amazing. Well, I'll try to make it quick. I was born in Brazil, and I'm an Italian citizen as well. So I came to Italy 7 years ago and started providing services in immigration law and citizenship. So my partnership with Lexidy started as well a little bit more than 2 years ago, when we launched the Milan office. And during this 2 years, I've been helping a lot of clients around the world to immigrate to Italy in a lawful manner, so they can stay in the country legally and they can enjoy basically Italian culture, Italian food, Italian lifestyle, and some of them actually can also enjoy some beneficial tax regimes. But that will be for another episode.
Yeah, that's there's often I find that people conflate these two individual topics. There's visas and then there's taxes, and they're two very separate things. Luckily at Lexidy you can tackle both with internally with the team there at Lexidy. But today we're really focused on immigration and the visa that allows people, the type of people that are often listening to this episode, which fall into the remote worker, digital nomad space. There are other options for people that want to come spend significant amount of time in Italy. We can touch on those briefly, but I think, the interesting thing about Italy in the past has been that it's this like incredibly diverse country, a very popular country. It needs no introduction in so many ways. But while a lot of other countries in Europe, like take Portugal, for example, have been super, adamant about being at the forefront of the conversation as far as bringing in foreigners, like almost, vying to attract foreigners to come and contribute to the economy. Italy hasn't really been as much at the forefront of that conversation. And so there are methods that people can go about using the immigration system to come live in Italy. They do exist, but it just hasn't been this like push from the government in the same way that some other countries have gone about it. But this is kind of changing, like literally as we speak. I think the Italian digital nomad visa is a huge step in that direction, trying to attract remote workers, attract digital nomads who want to come spend a lot of time here. So I'm going to shut up and let you tell us a little bit about it, Giancarlo, and then I'll ask some questions if I feel like there's some spaces that that might be particularly interesting for the audience to know about.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for giving me the arena. Well, basically, as you mentioned before, Italy has tons of different kinds of visa and residence permits that allow citizens to come live here. We have some options as the elective residence, who is usually for pensionates. We have investor visa for who wants to invest a little bit of money in Italy in an Italian company or in a fund. Well, they'll have to be cut out. So we have different options as you was telling us before. We have the elective residence for retirees or who has sufficient passive income. We have, for example, investor visas for who wants to invest a considerable sum of money in the country. And the digital nomad actually comes to fill a gap that Italy had compared to other EU countries, as we didn't have such a visa or such a facilitated manner to have high qualified professionals into the Italian workforce, let's say. We had applications for a EU blue card, but that was only limited for employees, and the employee could not work remotely. He was attached to the place or the office of the company in Italy. We had a freelance kind of visa, which is an autonomous work visa, but that was also limited by quotas every year, and only 500 were available every year, which is a very limited number comparing to how many applications Italy received. And the digital nomad comes to kind of fulfill both gaps, because when we speak about digital nomad visa, we are actually talking about two different visas that the Italian government launched. One of them is the digital nomad, and it's aimed for those professionals who are basically freelancers. The second one is the remote worker visa, and it's very interesting because the remote worker visa will serve both employees of foreign company and also employees of Italian companies. So if you want to be hired by an Italian company to work remotely, you will access that market through a remote worker visa, not a standard work visa anymore. And that's a very breakthrough from the Italian government, as tons of the requirements that we had for the work visa before had felt out of the place with the digital nomad and the remote worker visa. Aside from not having a quota cap anymore, so it's not limited by quotas, tons of requirements you had before are dropped out from the application. So it actually became easier if you want to come to do remote work in Italy. The digital nomad itself, the freelancer, will still have to respect some of the requirements once he is in Italy. And those, of course, would be to be compliant with the Italian fiscal law and social security law. And that's a very good positioning of the Italian government, to be honest. It's something that we have been waiting for from the past 2 years, as the Italian government took their time to regulate everything. But then we finally have the decree, and the consulates are slowly starting to implement the visa procedure. We have London that's already accepting applications for the digital nomad visa and for the remote worker. And we also have some consulates in the US who are establishing their web pages with the requirements and preparing them to receive the applications.
Wow, a lot of progress very fast and somewhat seemingly kind of like out of nowhere. Did you anticipate this coming to fruition, or like was it something that you had been hearing about and kind of knew was coming, or did it come out of nowhere for you?
No, it was a multiplicity of factors. So we had almost 2 years of complete blank information on the digital nomad and on the aspects of the requirements, what would be required for someone that wants to apply to it, because it was delegated to the government. So once the bill of law passed more than 2 years ago, they delegated the government to release the requirements. And the government sit on that for 2 years. So at the end of February, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, there was a parliamentary request for clarification and information on how that was proceeding with the government within the government. And an official answer came right after, stating that by that time, the government had already set up the requirements and they were only waiting on signatures from other ministries. And that was the point where we were like, oh, okay, now we have something. Now we have a concrete signature at least, and we are just waiting a little bit more for the other ministries to release their signatures.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And I mean, this is like the case with all governments. Like whenever I've talked to someone who's been kind of behind the scenes with building these visas at, in any government, I mean, it's always a process. There's always a lot of bureaucracy. Some move faster than others, but in any case, it's finally arrived here in Italy. And so I think people are really excited about it. I have like a couple clarifying questions. And of course, we want to get into the kind of the like guidelines that people need to know about like what they need to follow. But there's a few things that you mentioned already that I think are good to clarify before we get into that. So my first question is about the remote worker versus digital nomad aspect. If I'm one or the other, is there a different process that I'm going to follow? And I guess actually let me back up and just make sure that I understand. So you're saying that within the digital nomad, when they say they're launching the digital nomad visa, this is actually applicable to both your like traditional digital nomad that's self-employed and is traveling and wants to just come spend a year in Italy, for example, versus what we're calling remote worker here, who is like you're going to come work for an Italian company in Italy and work remotely, which previously wouldn't have been easily accessible, but now is. Do I understand that correctly? And if so, do I follow one process or two different processes for these visas?
Yeah, you are completely correct. So the digital nomad will be the ideal applicant, let's say, is the freelance that has been invoicing his own clients for more than 3 years, or that they can prove that they are qualified professionals. We'll get to that in a minute. And the remote worker will be an employee hired by either a foreign company or an Italian company to work from Italy and to work remotely from Italy. So let's say if a company is hiring an US citizen and this company is registered in Italy, it's an Italian company, but they are hiring that employee not to work in their offices, but to let the guy or girl work from anywhere in Italy with no mandatory presence in the office. That would be the case for a remote worker. The digital nomad would instead be the one freelance who would establish themselves in Italy, and after having the residence permit released, would open their own company, let's say their own personal company position in Italy, to invoice their clients from here, and they would be allowed to stay in Italy for the year. Of course, both residence permits and visas will follow mainly the same procedure. What will change will be the requirements and the documents that will be needed for each of them. The procedure will be the same at the end of the day.
Okay, got it. And with these, you mentioned like with one of the other visas, I think maybe the blue card you mentioned before, like there was like a quota or limitation. So in that case, for example, like you could meet all the requirements that are listed, but you could still be denied the visa because there's just a quota and you're not within the quota. But that's not the case with the digital nomad visa, correct? There's no quota.
That's correct. For the digital nomad or remote worker, there is no quota to be followed. So you can apply anytime in the year and there is no cap. So basically, if you meet the requirements, you are very likely to be approved for the visa and to be welcomed in Italy for the 1 year. And that's a good point. It's a visa that allows you to stay in Italy for 1 year. But then once you are in country, you can apply, you should apply for the residence permit, which is basically second step. And that one can be renewed from within Italy. So you don't need to go back to your country and reapply for a visa. All of the renewal process is made in country.
Awesome. Yeah, it brings up an interesting point, because I think for the common, person who's never gone through this process, they don't really know the difference between a visa and a residency permit. I know for me, from my standpoint, like I moved to Spain and I got my visa in America at a consulate in America. And then I arrived to Spain and the instructions were like very, not very clear. I really didn't understand it all. But like the people in the government office were explaining to me, I still had to apply for my residency permit. And I was like, no, I have my residency permit. I have this visa. And I thought it was one and the same. And so I just mentioned that for people that are maybe listening to this, expecting to go through this process for the first time, like it's nothing to be afraid of. Like it's just all part of the process, but just know that there are two separate steps. And if you have the visa, then Giancarlo can correct me if I'm mistaken here, but generally speaking, if you have the visa, you're going to get the residency permit, but you have to do that upon arrival, and that's a separate step, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And in Italy, we are very straightforward with it. So who has a visa only have 8 days after arriving in Italy to submit a request for a residence permit. So it's a very strict policy on the request for the residence permit. And the second thing is you cannot apply from the visa. You cannot apply within Italy. You need to apply at an Italian consulate abroad. There are very few options of residence permits that can be applied directly in Italy, but they limit themselves basically for family members of who already has a residence permit or who is of those who are family members of European citizens. So that's another point. We receive a lot of questions and we receive a lot of inquiries about applying for the visa in Italy, but that cannot be performed. It's different. It's a different situation. Other countries in EU accept the applications for digital nomads who are there maybe in a tourism visa, or they have like the visa waiver, so they just come to the Schengen area and they apply for the digital nomad. Greece is like that. And we have other countries in Europe that accepts that procedure, but unfortunately, that's not the case for Italy.
Yeah, that brings me. That was the exact question that I was going to ask you. So you beat me to it. You went ahead and answered that, because I think that's so important to understand. And personally, like just speaking from my experience, like if I'm making a move abroad, even though like in Greece's case, for example, which is like I think so fortuitous that they do it that way. Like even though you could arrive in Greece and go and apply once you got there, personally, if I'm moving my whole life abroad, I would rather like know that I have the visa ahead of time. So I'm okay with this for Italy, for example. But it is important in either case just to know that limitation exists. So like as of right now, you'll want to go and apply at your local consulate, and then once you've secured the visa, then make your move to Italy. This brings me to a point, though, which is something that I've heard, and maybe you can clarify, and you've already kind of alluded to this, that there's only, we're recording this in May of 2024. As of right now, there's only a handful of consulates that are even accepting these applications. So I guess A, is that true? And B, what do you foresee in the next couple months as far as like consulates opening up and being able to accept applications for this visa?
Yeah, so we have a tendency in the Italian consulates, and the consulate that already opened the applications for digital nomads and remote workers is the London consulate, the General Consulate of Italy in London. they open the applications and they open the booking system for this specific type of visa as well. So they have all of the requirements in their website already, stating everything that an applicant will need to bring to their appointments in order to have their visa released. And we have a few consulates in the US, and they are preparing the websites for the information. They stated that the government in Rome hasn't yet sent anything to them regarding to the visas, but it's just a matter of a couple of weeks, I would say, for the first one started implement it. The way I see it is that it will be starting from Miami and New York, and then it will expand to another regions. Maybe the next ones to follow would be Los Angeles and San Francisco. We have a lot of high requests from those. And so a client or a lead, well, the applicant could go to the website and use either the Prenota Me system, or they would go through a different service provider, which is Via Fast Global. And it's basically a provider for booking appointments and to receive the visas. Anyways, it can be performed already from London. We are waiting on other news in the US and in the other consulates in other countries like Australia. We received a couple of requests on information on that as well. So yeah, we are eager to see like how the next few weeks will develop in this sense, but they will most probably follow the same guidelines as the London consulate has already set for their citizens.
Excellent. Okay. And so kind of like in summary, if someone asked me very quickly, like, hey, I live in X place. Currently my local Italian consulate isn't accepting appointments for this, but we anticipate that they will in the coming months. And would it be correct to say like they can go ahead and start preparing their applications, and or like could they contact you, for example, and just go ahead and kind of get out ahead of that? Would that be somewhat of a safe bet to assume that they should go ahead and start making those arrangements?
Yes, of course, absolutely. And the point is that preparing an application usually takes time. So
Yeah.
most of our clients, they take around a month and a half to prepare all the documents that they need to apply for the visa. And I'm assuming it will not be different with the digital nomad or the remote worker, because in both cases, some very specific documents will be requested in order to prove either the work experience or the qualification in terms of education. If it's, for example, a remote worker that is applying, the company will have to provide with certain declarations, and those documents can usually take around one month and a half to be ready. If the consulate asks for apostilles, then it's another 1 month, 1 month and a half maybe. So we are talking about a lead time even before the appointment to apply of safely 1 month, 1 month and a half. Worst case, it can take around 2 to 3 months to have all of the documents in check.
Yeah, I mean, you can never get out in front of this stuff too much. In my case, this is the difference between working with a professional and not. Like when I tried to do my non-lucrative visa for Spain originally on my own, we were like hurrying, and it took us 6 months to do it. And like when I've worked with Lexidy in the past, for example, on some of my like visa renewals and stuff, it's just like boom, boom, boom. You follow the checklist. You guys know how to grease the wheels and make things happen quickly. And so it's another reason why I'm like always such an advocate of leaning on a professional that knows the ropes to help. So obviously in this case, we're talking about Giancarlo, but wherever you're going, whatever visa you're considering, that would be my recommendation. So maybe it would be good to talk a little bit about some of the requirements, like what some of the major bullet points that you need to check are if you're going to apply for this visa. Could you give us a little background? I know it can change a little bit, and these things we need to like always caution that this is the fluid situation. Things change a lot, so look at the timestamp of this versus when you're listening to it. But as of the day of recording, this is kind of what we're seeing that the government wants to see.
Correct, especially because the legal requirements shall be the same for any consulate, but by experience, each consulate tends to tweak a little bit and add their own interpretation on the requirements. This time, the Italian government was not much clear on the requirements for the visa, And I will give you first the general requirements, what we know about in regard the legislation. And after I'll make some comments on specific ones because they were not quite clear, and I'll just add a bit of experience on the requests. So starting from the general requirements for a digital nomad visa, the government asks for you to be a highly qualified professional. That means nowadays that you will fall under one of those four categories. So either you have a 3-year diploma from a university recognized in your own country, or you have provided that you have more than 3 years of experience in the role that you are planning on to develop in Italy. You can also have a high professional qualification demonstrated by at least 5 years of professional experience. If you don't have like any, let's say if you don't have a diploma for a grad school and you don't have a university degree, you can prove that experience by showing 5 years of professional experience in the field that is relevant to the profession or the sector where you want to be hired for or to offer your services as a freelance. And this is basically becoming a high qualified professional. It's one of the requirements. The second requirement is imposed by the decree, telling that being a highly qualified professional is not the only thing. You need to be a highly qualified professional that's able to provide your services or to perform your work remotely using 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 instruments or tools that enables you to work remotely. Basically, what we do now, we work from our desk with our notebooks, with our cell phones, remote internet connection, and that's considered being able to perform your duty, to perform your work with tools that allow you to do so remotely. Then we have the income requirement, and the Italian government set the income requirement for digital nomads on around 25,500 euro per year, where digital nomads will have to prove that they had earned that amount in the previous year. And whoever is trying to contract or to hire remote workers will also have to establish a paycheck that is at least 25,500 per year. Plus, there is a specific category in Italy, or well, a specific table of contents, let's say, in Italy that regulates salary for different categories of professionals. So if your category has a higher salary than that, the company that's hiring you will have to respect that minimum category salary. Third requirement, and that's one that is not much clear, but the Italian government asks for you to provide proof of accommodation in the country. What that means that you have to show some kind of booking from hotels or a lease agreement, or that you own property in Italy already. And I will comment a little bit more on that requirement specifically after. The, I would say, ultimate requirement alongside with all of those would be for you to have a health insurance covered of a minimum of 1 year, which is the duration of the visa. So we will not be a burden into the Italian national health system. Of course, all of the other material requirements like having a valid passport and etc. are mostly shared with other visas as well. But what to focus on, I would say, would be income, being a high qualified professional, having accommodations in Italy, and then having also health insurance to protect you here from basically whatever happens to you in the country in terms of we cancel the part. That's good.
Is the health insurance something that, I guess it's, again, these are always like multi-part questions. Is health insurance something that Lexidy can help provide? Is the first part. And then like B, I guess, do you see people buying, what do you see people buying when they need to fulfill this? Like, do they just buy a travel insurance policy for a year, or do they go to something like Safety Wing or Insured Nomads, where they're getting, like essentially like a digital nomad, like a long-term travel insurance, I guess, or digital nomad insurance? Or is there some like, public forum where you buy this. Yeah, just like general guidance in this could be useful for people, I think.
No, of course. We have partnerships with insurance brokers, and they will be able to either provide you the cheapest option or to tailor made a solution that will be very comprehensive.
Yeah, that's you started to mention that the insurance is cheap. And like I think I know this can be relative, but like I also, looking at like Italian health insurance policies, I was certainly impressed by this when I moved to Spain. It's like for people coming from the US at least, and even from other countries, I think that you'll find that this is you're expecting in your head when you hear, oh my God, I have to buy a year's worth of health insurance, like that's going to be expensive. I've seen numbers, Giancarlo, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen numbers in the 600, 600 per year, 700 per year for an individual, to be covered. So I don't think you're talking about thousands of euros or dollars or something here. Is that fair to assume?
Yeah, so that's a fair assumption. That's correct. And talking about the health insurance again and the prices, what we are used to here in Italy is either a very cheap policy, and we can find those for well, like 400 a year, not even 600, but less than that. 400 a year would be a very cheap health insurance policy that would cover all of the minimum requirements of the visa. The health insurance itself needs to bring some requirements that are dictated by law in Italy, and they must cover, for example, all of the Schengen area, not only Italy. So you are never purchasing a health insurance only for Italy. It will always cover you in the Schengen area, and it has to cover, for example, repatriation of remains and pregnancy risks as well. The minimum coverage should be 30,000 euro, which is very, very low coverage, if you ask me, but it still pay out a lot of treatments in Italy that you might need. So it's not that we are it's not that we are wasting millions in treatments or a couple of 100,000 in health treatments here in the country, even if you have to go to the private sector in a private clinic or hospital, you most likely not be asked to pay like US reality prices.
Yeah. This is always a huge plus for people moving from the US over to really anywhere in Europe. But I mean, I know from looking at some of the prices of things in Italy, this is absolutely going to be a warm welcome. I had to go to the hospital actually not that long ago in Italy, and my health insurance is through Spain, and same thing. It covers you all throughout Schengen. And, I ended up I had to spend the whole day in the hospital and had treatments and lots of medicine given to me and spent lots of time with doctors and stuff. And I'm thinking the whole time, like, oh, I'm really happy this is covered by my insurance. And I got the bill, like the whole bill was like 100 euros. And it was just like, that was mind blowing for someone coming from the US. Like your mind automatically goes to thousands or tens of thousands. And so anyway, that again, that was covered by the insurance. So this is a warm welcome for anyone, coming to Europe. I think you'll be very pleased in that regard. And it's cool to know that you guys can help guide them, provide the connections to get the health insurance if needed. We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at Lexidy. I've lived abroad in various countries, and one common denominator I've found is that dealing with foreign bureaucracy is a nightmare. Trying to navigate visa and immigration waters in another language is not something I'd recommend ever trying on your own, even for the most experienced of us. So when I recently had to renew my Spanish visa again, I turned it over to the pros at Lexidy. They've already helped more than 5,000 expats and digital nomads find a home and thrive in countries like Portugal, or in my case, Spain, also Italy, France, and Greece. Some very desirable locations indeed. So whether you're trying to obtain your first visa abroad, purchase a property, or work through international tax issues, Lexidy's team of friendly lawyers is here to simplify your journey. The team is super knowledgeable, bilingual, and thorough, and I seriously cannot recommend their services enough. My experience working with them has been incredible, and I can honestly say I don't know that I would have EU permanent residency if it wasn't for the help of the team at Lexidy. So if you're ready to make your move abroad, then Lexidy is offering an exclusive discount to About Abroad listeners. Grab 10% off your first service with the code AboutAbroad2023 and learn more over at Lexidy.com in the show notes and start your abroad journey today. If you've made it this far into the episode and you're still enjoying yourself, then I would love to ask a quick favor. Open up the app that you're using to listen to this podcast and leave a quick review. You can do this in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and really just about any platform that allows podcast listening now. If you can't find that in the interface of the app, then scroll down in the show notes and find ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, and you should be able to leave it from there. Thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoy the rest of the show. The second question that I wanted to ask you was connected to you said you were going to reference this, so just to make sure we get to it, the proof of accommodations. This is always very confusing because it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, right? Like you're like, okay, I have to provide proof of accommodations, but in order to get proof of accommodations, I kind of need to like either be there or at least know that I can go. So how am I going to like secure proof of accommodations? How long does it need to be for? What does proof look like? Is it a week, a month? Is it an Airbnb booking? Is it a friend's house that I can stay at? Do I need a full lease? Like all these questions start popping up. And you know, like, again, like, do I do this all before I actually get the visa? Like, am I going to lose my money? And so anyway, I think like there's a lot to be discussed on this one. And it would be good to hear, like, as a professional advisor in this space, like, what do you advise people do when they're applying for this visa?
Well, of course, the safest way to have accommodations granted in Italy is to have a lease agreement, either for a long time, which is 4 years, or a short time, and it has to cover the minimum 1 year of the visa. This is the safest route. It's the way of proving accommodations that are widely accepted by Italian consulates. And the catch here is that in Italy, we don't have a good history with Airbnbs. So the Italian government has very strict policies on rental properties, and the possibility from the town hall to assess if that property has all the hygienic sanitary regulations in order. And it's a document that's required for other applications. So if you were applying, for example, for a work visa or a blue card, at some point you would need to present something that's called Certificato di Idoneità Abitativa or Idoneità d'Alloggio, which is basically the same document, and it's a certification from the town hall stating that the unity, the apartment or house you are renting or where you are staying with, complies with all the hygienic sanitary rules in Italy. Most of Airbnbs are not ready for it, or they cannot provide it, or they just don't want to provide it. So I would say don't go with Airbnbs for digital nomad. I know it's kind of contradictory because you are a nomad, you are a remote worker, so you should be free to move and to go wherever you wish. But Italy has this set of regulations when it comes to housing, and especially residential properties. So aside from the lease, you can, of course, own your property. If you already have a house in Italy or an apartment, you wanted to profit from it, you can just declare that you are a owner of a place here. The other possibilities would be in always remembering the requirements for hygienic sanitary position would be bookings from a hotel, because aside from Airbnbs, there are certified receiving structures in Italy that by default will have to comply with those requirements. Hotels are one of those. And then we have a gray area where to be hosted by a friend or to have a comodato d'uso gratuito, which is basically a free lease agreement, could also be accepted, but they will still carry a little bit of risk because it's not a guaranteed accommodation per se. So at any time, your friend could kick you out of the house, or they could simply cancel the free lease agreement. So going safely, a lease agreement for a minimum of 1 year will be the best solution. And it is a bet. It is a bet, it's a risk, because as you said, the Italian government asks for proof of secured accommodations even before applying for the visa. So at the moment of your application, you already have to go to the consulate and bring your signed and registered lease agreement for Italy, even without knowing that the visa will be released. That's why highly advise to work with a professional so you can reduce your liability to the to the very few, and not be surprised by having maybe some document or some requirement that you thought you had, and at the end of the day you mistakenly took something for granted that wasn't comply with the Italian law.
Fair enough. I think that is a huge challenge for people to overcome. Probably, if that's the expectation, that's what we have to work with. But I do, I can imagine somebody's thinking, "Wow, that's going to be tough. I've never even been to Italy, or I don't know even where to begin looking for a full-time lease." So I guess just to follow this up real quick, another multi-part question: is there, is it worth applying if you say, hey, you know what, I am going to just book an Airbnb for a month and submit the application and let's see, or I'm going to book something on booking.com for a week or something, a shorter period of time so that I can get there and then get my bearings straight. Is it even worth applying in either of those scenarios, or is it just going to be a hard no? You need to get the full lease.
It will be a hard no. I would say if you want to take the bet, go for anything, but the duration has to be at least of 1 year, because you need to show proof that you are covering the whole visa period.
Okay. And then so the backup or the follow-up question to that is, where are there websites or places people use in Italy? Like, like I'm aware of Immobiliaria, the app Immobiliaria, or like Idealista. Are those places that you would recommend going to, or are there other outlets for this that you recommend?
Well, we have separated a list of websites and trusted real estate agencies that are franchising agencies, basically. So you have a certain level of service that's delivered by them that it's quite standard, and those are absolutely a way to go while searching for property in Italy. And we do also have a partnership with a relocation company that provides services of house hunting. When you will give them your ideal house or your ideal apartment in your ideal area, and they will take care of doing the research and getting in touch with the available properties in the market.
Excellent. Okay. That's great to know. So we will link to that information. There's going to be a link in the show notes if you're listening to this, where you can access all of the information that we're talking about. So that will be included as part of the information in the show notes. Giancarlo, I know we only have a little bit of time left with you, so I want to get to two very important questions real quick. We can kind of summarize them very quickly, I think, without going into too many details, because everybody's situation is going to be unique. The first one is taxes. So when you do the digital nomad visa, do you become a tax resident of Italy? And is there any like super important high level information people should be aware of as part of that?
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the question. Yeah, it's a thing that we can use to wrap up everything. And as a general rule, becoming a tax resident in Italy means that you will spend more than 183 days in the country during a calendar year, from 1st of January to 31 of December. At that point, you will be liable for paying taxes in Italy and on your global income. So it's a thing that you have to consider. How Italian tax works is that you will always file and pay your taxes in the next year regarding the first year you become an Italian tax resident. So a quick example, if you had your residence registered in Italy before July of this year, the next year you start declaring taxes and paying taxes here. If you register after July of this year, your first Italian tax resident year will become 2025, and you will declare and pay taxes here in 2026. That means that you will pay taxes over your global income. And once you start invoicing from Italy and once you start providing services as a remote worker, you will still need to pay taxes regarding your Italian income. Anyways, so there is unfortunately no Italian fiscal paradise, but we have some very good partnerships with accountants and tax specialists who can give both like in-depth consultations or even general perspectives on what your tax liabilities will be.
Excellent. Yeah. Again, it's a separate subject that we need to tackle in a different discussion because and really it's just so complex and so individual to each person's situation. It's not worth diving too deep on the details, but generally speaking, know that you will become an Italian tax resident. So you'll want to look into the tax brackets and figure out, what that means for you financially. And again, like consult a professional. Giancarlo can connect you with some of our favorites. And then, so the last thing I just want to ask you really quickly about is the renewal process. Like, can you renew this, or are you capped out at 1 year? And if so, can you do that from within Italy, or do you need to go back home? And either way, are the expectations, the guidelines pretty much the same, or do they change?
Yeah, no, you can renew it from within Italy, and it can be renewed indefinitely as long as you keep the initial requirements. So it's basically a redo of the first residence permit request. And if you do it for 5 consecutive years, becoming let's say a resident in Italy for 5 consecutive years and respecting another requirements after those 5 years, you can become a permanent resident of Italy. You could have some experience with that in Spain already, but that applies also to other European countries.
That's right. Okay, that's really good. Actually, one last question on the taxes thing. I just recall something that you and I actually discussed once before, that there's actually this like freelancers tax where I think it's like a 5% flat tax or something if you're a freelancer making under a certain amount, which is a pretty high amount. I don't want to go into all the details on this today, but just curious, can that apply? Is that worth looking into as a digital nomad? Or is that a totally separate subject?
It is. It's absolutely worth looking into. And the bracket is 85,000 euro per year. So if you make anything less than that, you are probably fit for this specific regime where you pay 5% tax on a percentage of your income during the year, usually either 62% or 78%, depending on your profession. And that's where you will pay only the 5% tax on that income. So it's a very interesting regime. It lasts for the first 5 years. And after the first 5 years, it gets raised by 15%. So let's say you get 5 years of grace and then you start paying a little bit more, 15%, which is still lower than the standard tax brackets in Italy. So it's totally worth looking into.
Awesome. That can be super powerful, guys. So like if that fits your situation, if you're a freelancer exploring the digital nomad visa and you make under 85,000 more or less euros per year, which is, around 95,000 or less US dollars, then you might be able to save a lot in taxes, still get to go live la dolce vita, and maybe have a bit more money in your pocket to explore more of this beautiful country. There's a lot more we could probably get into, but I think we provided a really nice high-level overview. This stuff all is fluid. It changes a lot, and it depends a lot on your personal situation. So we just wanted to touch on the high-level bullet points and to make sure you get some information that you can use if this sounds interesting to you. Go talk to Giancarlo and the pros at Lexidy if you really want to go a bit deeper and start pursuing this. I just spent a lot of time in Italy this past year and can tell you it's just such an incredible place to call home if you want to do that for yourself. So highly encouraged from me. Giancarlo, thank you so much for the time. I know I got to let you go, so I appreciate you and all that you guys do and for providing all this awesome information for us today.
Thanks, Chase. My pleasure. And I'm here for questions you guys need. I'll be lucky and happy to provide you feedback and info.
Fantastic. All right. Well, arrivederci, and hope to speak to you soon. Thank you again. We'll be in touch.
Arrivederci.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.